Welcome to Radio Abundance, a podcast by YIMBY Democrats for America. It's time to build again, folks. Fascism never made America great, but when progressives build, that's where you'll find American greatness. Tonight's guest is the former mayor of Stockton, California, and the founder of End Poverty in California, Michael Tubbs. As mayor, Michael pioneered guaranteed basic income and oversaw dramatic reductions in crime. Now, Michael Tubbs is running for Lieutenant Governor of California on a platform to build, baby, build. That's coming up right now on Radio Abundance.
You're listening to Radio Abundance, a podcast by YIMBY Democrats for America. Now let's get to the show.
Please welcome your host for the evening, YIMBY Democrats for America Executive Director Steve Boyle. And to kick things off, here's Steve.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I hate these guys.
Hello and welcome to Radio Abundance. I'm your host. I'm Steve Boyle, the Executive Director of YIMBY Democrats for America. We are on location in studio in Los Angeles today with two Radio Abundance Los Angeles co-hosts. I am here with Alex Melendrez, a longtime activist with YIMBY Action. He founded YIMBY Latino and was a DNC delegate for the 2024 election. Hey, Alex.
Happy to be here.
I am also with Zenon Ulyate Crow. Zenon, likewise a young activist with YIMBY Los Angeles, the West Side Young Democrats, now Abundance Network's Abundant Santa Monica. And Zenon was the youngest commissioner in Santa Cruz's history.
Yes, thank you so much.
Welcome to Radio Abundance. And speaking of young folks, we got a young folk here.
Well, I'm still young. I feel old with these guys.
Yeah. I felt old learning about your age the other day. I knew you were, when you were first elected, I think you were one of the youngest elected officials ever in the U.S. I think age 22. You've been the mayor of Stockton. You are now running for the lieutenant governor of California. I have even for politicians, even young politicians, I have a certain vision in my head that they're a little older. And then we were hanging out the other day, championing SB 79 in Sacramento. You had more to say to championing that. I basically walked up to them. Like I said, I'm Steve Boyle with YIMBY Democrats, and I approve. But a friend of mine was there who said you went to college together, and he and I went to high school together. So that bummed me out because with imposter syndrome. Speaking of imposter, Michael Tubbs, thank you for joining us on Radio Abundance.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's fantastic to be here. Why are you running for lieutenant governor?
Lieutenant governor in California in this moment is a position that requires leadership, right? The job has very particular things you're responsible for. You're on the UC and CSU board, one of the only people in the state on both. And what people don't know, particularly for this conversation, is that both the UC and CSU can build by right. In the same way they build buildings and departments, they could build housing. They could build more student housing. As you probably know, going to UC Santa Cruz, they could, but also build more workforce housing. And the lieutenant governor also sits on the state lands commission and is responsible for being a good steward of our environment, but also making sure we're being thoughtful about when it is appropriate to actually build more housing. And then beyond that, it's just an incredible bully platform. It's the second highest elected official in the fourth largest economy in the world, an economy that we know isn't working for everyone, an economy that we know isn't building enough housing for everyone. So it just felt like the right opportunity to make an impact on the issues I care about and to make sure that California remains sort of a beacon of what a multiracial democracy could look like or what a society that's moving forward, not looking towards the past for inspiration, but looking at the future, embracing innovation and figuring out how do you make sure we all do well. And it was just an amazing opportunity, so I'm excited to be in the race.
So you begin with an interesting thread, right? Because we'll of course talk about policies around housing and YIMBYism and abundance in California, and basically how to make it possible for people to build, the private market, citizens, community developers, anybody to build, and governments included. And speaking of governments, you've mentioned as lieutenant governor, you would have land and permission, which are two of the hardest things to build. So if you did become lieutenant governor, what would you want to do with that land?
I'm going to be the most annoying regent of all time.
Yeah.
Insofar as I think, we have to leverage the thousands of acres of the UC and CSU system. And the real need, we know that students need housing, that janitors need housing, that adjunct faculty needs housing, that the people who work at university need housing, and really making it a priority for that system to build. It's not a 10-year project. It's not a 20-year project. It's a necessity. And not just because I love housing, but because there's a real need that throughout our system, from the UC level to the CSU level, even the community college level, the biggest need is housing and student housing. You have people taking longer to graduate because they can't find housing. You have people not graduating because they can't find housing. You have people graduating while living in cars or couch surfing because they can't find housing. So that's a manageable problem, a worthy problem, and one that I will use the bully pulpit in the position of trustee to really push and advocate for, because my experience in government has taught me nothing just happens and nothing happens easily. Yeah. You always have to push. You always have to get on people's nerves. You always have to be annoying. But that's the only way anything, particularly important things, get done.
And I'll put some numbers to that as well. In the UC, 7% of students are currently experiencing homelessness. In the CSU, it's about 15%. In the community colleges, it's about 22%. Yeah. I actually founded the Student Homes Coalition in California, which worked on passing student housing legislation at the state level. We've passed 5 out of 7 bills for the past 3 years.
Well, thank you for your work. Amazing.
I mean, something we're very familiar with in the Bay Area is students being seen as pollution, and the sort of now there's just been some good reforms and clarifications to CEQA, but it was quite vague about what was pollution, and people could say that students were pollution, young people were pollution, noise is pollution, parties is pollution, but genuinely to block student housing, to block low-income housing and affordable housing. I talked with John Lovett, former speechwriter for Barack Obama and host of Pod Save America. We talked in the fall. He said that was a big radicalizing moment for him to see, in the East Bay, student housing be thwarted because students were pollution. But this story has made it across the pond. I was in London 2 weeks ago, I was at Parliament, having lunch with a member of Parliament and a sort of a world-crossing academic. And the academic, a guy named Alain Berthaud, started to, we were just telling stories of NIMBYism around the world, and was talking about students not being able to, us not being able to build student housing in California. So it is legendary, this failure and betrayal, and excited that you might take a stab at fixing it.
Yes, sir.
I hate to say this, but students do breathe CO2, just saying.
Yeah, gotta watch out for that.
But I think also what's lost in the conversation, in addition to students, it's also the people who work at the universities who need housing. Our universities are some of the biggest employers in the state. And just like we require or want other big employers to build housing near the job site, the CSU and UC system has to do the same thing.
Even at the community college level, I actually had a brief stint where I almost became a community college trustee in my home district back in San Mateo County.
Nice.
And I ended up earning the endorsement of the faculty union because of this particular thing. A lot of their part-time professors, aside from some healthcare benefits they were working on, were just a lack of housing opportunities, or the fact that a lot of them had to drive into this very wealthy district that had an excess of money and
land.
Yeah, exactly. I will say that district was the first district in the county educational district to build housing, so they were starting to work on that. But that was also one of their primary issues. And the reason why, not to talk about my experience, but the reason I earned their endorsement was because I was a strong advocate for wanting to build more housing so that these people can live here and do the work that they were happy to do for students.
And when we talk about teacher housing, janitor housing, this is all levels, right? It's something I've seen even in the suburbs I grew up in. I've tried to build affordable teacher housing, and the community can go, I don't like it. It's too many stories. The homes are too close together. I don't want it. And suddenly you're saying students can't live, teachers can't live. And by the way, university, this isn't just charity for students and teachers. Universities are the engines of culture and economic development and innovation, the companies of the future, the jobs of the future, the game-changing research of the future. It all happens at universities. And I'll just say, I think universities already are a little bit of a model for the cities we want, the neighborhoods we want, right? These walkable neighborhoods where you live by people you know and like, where there is intellectual stimulation and social events. I think a lot of the loneliness crisis, a lot of the separation of our society, a lot of what people want when they move to cities, a lot of what young people want, but also people, what elderly people want, right? Like this, we want a place you can walk and be with anything you need to get and and people you love and stuff to do. And I think we're just asking to let students live, let teachers live, and let's all live in our little universe of universities.
Americans pay a lot of money to see this stuff and go overseas to Europe.
Well, and not just Europe, but Disneyland. We're sitting here in Los Angeles. We're not really. No, I'm going to hit this so many times and on every interview because look, you can in California, you can build dense neighborhoods, walkable neighborhoods, abundant public transportation, mixed-use buildings. You don't have to do setbacks. You can have cafes on the street corner and tree-lined streets and bring the build. You can do all of this as long as nobody can stay the night and there are roller coasters. But if you do, people are willing to fly across the country and the world and pay hundreds of dollars a day for not a room to sleep in. Right, and some of it it's so the kids can see, Mickey Mouse, and some of it it's to ride the roller coaster. But I think there's quite a lot of people there that are, youngish, middle age that don't have kids. I don't think they're there for Mickey Mouse. I think we just like that stuff, and I think we should all be able to have it.
I mean, literally, aside from Disneyland itself, you have Downtown Disney, which is a walkable shopping mall attached to Disney that people go to just walk around. I mean, they just like the walking.
This is so funny because Disneyland actually has a city hall. My favorite joke every time I go is like, I am here to make a public comment to Mr. Mouse. Can you build some more, please?
All right, enough Mickey Mouse. Back to Michael Tubbs. Michael, what else does the lieutenant governor do?
The lieutenant governor is also the acting governor when the governor is gone and out of state. And the lieutenant governor also is the emissary for foreign trade, which before was more of a symbolic role, but given this current administration and tariffs and the ways in which the United States trade position with partners is always subject to change, that's going to be a real role to make sure that California uses its market share to continue market capture to continue to do things that benefit the economy, that allow people to build and allow people to prosper. I'm right here in California.
Sometimes I've thought of the lieutenant governor as kind of like the sort of vice president role for a state governor, but in this case, it's your own election. You don't run on a ticket with a gubernatorial candidate.
It's a separate election, and it creates again a huge platform. Mm-hmm. And I think what I've learned, particularly in the last 6 months, is that folks need leaders that are going to level with them and explain to them what's happening, what's going on, how is this working, what are the blocks, why isn't this done, why hasn't that been passed. I think a big part of how I've envisioned the role will be doing that, being an explainer in chief, and also doing stuff that most lieutenant governors don't do, like testifying on every single bill I think is important. I've done that already as a candidate. I've testified on the two most quote unquote controversial housing bills this cycle, one by Buffy Wicks around CEQA reform and one from Scott Wiener around transit-oriented development. And not because it's in my job description, or not because the lieutenant governor has any authority, but because leadership demands like action. It's the right thing to do and to make it really clear to people, like, no, this is not about some abstract notions of right and wrong or an adherence to a rigidity that doesn't really work for people anymore. This is about, we have a problem. We don't have enough housing. We need every tool in the toolbox to build more housing. And when those things come up, I'm doing it as a candidate, but even more so as a lieutenant governor, will be very bullish about this is where I stand, this is why we need it to do, why it needs to happen, and exert some force and pressure, because I think that's the only way California and Sacramento actually moves. Like, you have to push it. Well, Einstein, Newton, an object at rest tends to stay at rest. We have to push, and it's going to take leadership to do that.
Yeah. We ran into each other while you were testifying for SB 79 for transit-oriented development in Sacramento. I wonder if you can testify a little here. Can you tell us about those two bills and what you said about them and why you believe in them?
Yeah, well, the Buffy Wicks bill on CEQA reform, the argument was there's nothing progressive about process in and of itself. There's nothing forward-thinking or democratic about delay. There's nothing enlightened about not getting the thing done. And we know that nothing is sacrosanct, at least in my view. Like, nothing is untouchable. And CEQA has its uses. CEQA is not altogether terrible, but we do know that CEQA has been used and weaponized in a terrible way as it comes to delaying and denying the ability to build housing. So Buffy's bill was a simple one. It was like, for things that have infill projects that have already gone through the CEQA process, through the general plan, that land doesn't have to go through the CEQA process again for another project. Basically, if the squirrels are going to be okay in the general plan, they'll be okay again in the same land that's already been looked at. It's like why be redundant, particularly with the fact that we have a crisis, particularly that we don't have enough housing. And then Scott Wiener's bill is around transit-oriented development. And it's simply that we know that our transit systems need ridership. We know that LA, the Bay Area, et cetera, that we need more people to ride these public utilities, which are our transportations, A. B, we know that transit-oriented development provides an opportunity for a lot of infill, dense, and multi-level housing, right? Mm-hmm. And C, we know that there's a demand for it, that young people, but all people have no problem living next to the BART, have no problem living next to the metro, have no problem living with the transportation hubs. And we also know that there's a climate impact when folks aren't able to live next to transit, when folks have to commute for hours. So when I was mayor of Stockton, we led the state in the nation in the number of super commuters. 10% of our population commuted 3 hours a day or more for work. And it's because the housing that people could afford was in Stockton, but the jobs were in the Bay Area, but the housing wasn't there, near the BART station, near the Pleasanton BART, et cetera. So Senator Wiener's bill will allow for that to happen, and that one's working its way through the process. And I'm hopeful that our friends in the legislature see that now is the time to think a little bit differently. Now is the time to have constructive dialogue with some of our friends. And now is the time to really show the folks in California that we're not just saying that it's a problem, but we understand that we have tools that can make that problem more solvable. And on the Scott Wiener bill, it's a triple win. It's good for the environment, it's good for our transit ridership, and it's good to increase the number of units of housing to, again, get us towards the goal of the amount of housing we actually have to build for the people who live in California to be able to stay living here in California.
Thank you for bringing up the climate change and environment, the climate change implications of building homes, climate change implications of the CEQA reform, right? So CEQA stands for what? California Environmental Quality Act, is that right? Yep. Yeah. So, I like to say, when Trump says, I'm making America great again, we know that's bullshit. He's destroying American greatness, right? When Republicans say this is the one big beautiful bill, we know that's bullshit. There's nothing beautiful about it. No. So I like to say, why when you hear about the California Environmental Quality Act, do you assume it's about the environment or quality? Because it's in the name. I really, to our own side, of people who I feel like a lot of why we come to this movement, why we come to abundance, is because we grew up as progressives wanting to fight climate change, seeing this existential threat, this planetary emergency, and all the intransigence and denial on the right that is poisoning our world and holding us back from thriving in the atmosphere we deserve. And so I say, how dare you, Democrats, say that climate change is a planetary emergency and let climate change deniers in Texas lap us on building green energy? How dare you say that climate change is perhaps the most important issue in the world, but also make sure that people can't live where they can walk to work and to each other. They have to live 3 hours away and commute by gasoline and plastic what word am I going for?
Gas guzzlers.
We'll just say guzzling. emitting gasoline and plastic shedding, emitting vehicles 3 hours back and forth both ways. That doesn't take care of people. It doesn't take care of the environment.
Can I mention high-speed rail, or is that like a third thing? A third rail we don't want to touch right now?
I think you keep us on track.
This is the train punts. I mean, that's the penultimate example. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, California has become a little bit of a punching bag for its inability to basically get it off the ground. But I can't think of something that would have been better for the environment than having a high-speed rail where people would be able to commute across California at a rapid speed. I mean, and that basically had a death by 1,000 cuts, and a lot of that was due to delays in environmental regulations, which you can't even describe better irony than that.
And I mean, CEQA as a law, people forget this. The entire point of the law is to analyze what the difference from the status quo is. That's it. It just says, how is this different from what's there right now? You take an oil refinery and you want to build a solar power plant, that's going to require a CEQA report because that's changing from the status quo. And climate change the way we respond to it, the only way you can respond to it is by changing literally the entire way that we live and operate in our society today.
Yeah. Michael, I want to get to you and your background in Stockton and universal basic income in a second, but I'm curious how this all stacks up in terms of the rest of your field, right? This is, in California, I mean, and it's early, right? The election's next year, we're well away from the primaries, but like California, you're running against Democrats. How are they on these issues? How do you kind of fit in there?
No, I think, or I know in my race, it's been clear to me, which is part of the reason why I decided to run, that being a Democrat is necessary but not sufficient. And in California, that phrase almost has no meaning. Like, I'm a Democrat. What does that mean? Like, what do you fight for? What have you done? And what are you prepared to do? So I think the big differentiator is that I'm a person of action. Yeah. And when you have action, you make some people upset. But I'm not afraid of making people upset for the right things. I'm not afraid of disagreeing with my friends for things that are important, like poverty, like ending poverty or building more housing. And I think that's really, as over the course of the year, people see that's the big difference. We can all say the right things. We all have ChatGPT. Everyone knows what to say to the right audience, but it's really about what are you going to do, and then what have you done, and what are you doing while running. And I just think on those three dimensions, there's no contest between me and my opponents.
Well, let's use your own words to segue to your background then, and I'm thinking about your time in Stockton and your work on ending poverty in California. Michael Tubbs, what do you fight for? What have you done, and what are you going to do?
One of my favorite quotes is from the movie Color Purple, when the character Celie says, "All my life I had to fight." And that really encapsulates sort of the energy I bring to politics. And I'm really fighting for a government that works for everyone, truly. A government that simply works for everyone. And I think what gives me hope is that we have so many examples of the government working for some people, like very well. Like this terrible bill that the Trump administration passed is a beautiful example of the government working for some people, for the billionaires and all the folks that got their the people not on Medicaid. That bill works great, bigly as he would say, for them, and it's illustrative that no, we can make this thing work for some people, and my job is to try to make it work for all people. And when I was in Stockton, I fought for a city government that was functional, a city government that could deliver services, and a city government that provided a baseline level of security and opportunity for people. So we reduced homicides by 40%. We reduced shootings by 30%. We went from bankruptcy to the second most fiscally healthy city in the state. We created a universal scholarship program. So even to this day, every single kid who graduates with a 2.0 is guaranteed a scholarship to a trade school. If they want to be a beautician or a welder or a barber, a 2-year school, or a 4-year school, with the idea being Stockton is number 99 in the top 100 cities in terms of college attainment. So the idea being to grow our economy, we have to let our young people know there's an expectation for you to do something after high school, but we're also going to give you the resources to do it. Did the first guaranteed income program in the country while mayor in Stockton, primarily because just obsessed with this idea that in a country, in a state that has so much wealth, the state that has so much creativity, the state that's the 4th largest economy in the world, why are so many people poor? Why is poverty so pervasive? Why are so many people unsheltered? And why are we okay with that? And the idea was just, let's test something. Let's test and see if a small amount of cash provides enough of a shock absorber to allow people to deal with financial volatility, and also allow people to actually build a foundation, to buy a floor, buy boots, and then buy straps they can pull themselves up with. And since being mayor and council person, I've continued that fight with End Poverty in California, where I've gone up and down the state in communities, listening to folks, and again, trying to figure out why is it in a state so liberal, in a state that creates everything from the technology we use to the food we eat to the culture we consume, are so many people who are powering the state poor, or so many people who are working themselves literally to death, can't afford housing. And what's the mismatch between our rhetoric and what we do? And then also I've scaled guaranteed income across the country. So now there's 80 pilots happening across the country, over $500 million in government dollars have gone out. to over 20,000 Americans from cities and counties I've helped all across the country to pilot this idea of a guaranteed income. So those are some of the things I've done. That's some of the things I'm fighting for. And then all the unsexy like legislation stuff, like attaching myself to bills that may seem controversial. And maybe that's why sometimes I get in trouble. It don't seem controversial to me. It's like, this is like common as very simple, actually. This is not complicated, like build more housing. But even in my time as a mayor, I remember one of the biggest fights I had was when I went to end the golf course subsidy because we had an issue with affordable housing. So I didn't even say build housing on the golf course, which I probably should have if I was going to get all that heat. I didn't think I could do all that, but I said we could take that money and create an affordable housing trust so that we could help projects pencil out. We streamlined the permit center. We built more units in the 4 years I was mayor than in any time pre-2008. Great recession. And a lot of it was just having an orientation towards yes. And not letting and projects would sometimes almost die at the council, and I would call the developers and the unions into my office, and we would negotiate there and be like, no, this is too important. We need this downtown project, and we need it to be mixed use, and we do need some affordable units. Let's figure out a number we can get to that everyone, and no one walked away hella happy all the time, but everyone walked away feeling like, okay, the project's not dead. There's something happening. So that's some of the things I fight for and some things I plan to fight for. And sorry for the very long answer.
I loved it. I'm going to go back to the very beginning because you mentioned some huge achievements and gains in public safety. I think public safety is on the minds of a lot of California voters right now. And in the coming years, it's going to be on the minds of a lot of American voters looking at California on public safety to evaluate Democratic leadership, right? We saw in the last election, and California's going to vote blue at the end of the day, but we saw a ton of voters across California, across San Francisco, across Los Angeles, vote red, especially people of color, a lot of times talking about issues around public safety and public disorder. And it does seem like people of color, most of all, are caught between under-policing and over-policing. And as a result, Democratic policymakers are too, right? How do we rightly say we cannot have a world where police can abuse their authority without accountability and kill and maim Black men and families and have these overly aggressive uses of authority and violence? And then in order to curb that and resolve that, it seems like we then went into the direction of I think what you would call sort of a toleration of extreme and degrading disorder. And it turns out in both hurt people and both hurt the most vulnerable people most of all, whether you are suffering from state violence or whether you are suffering from the anarchy of neglect and the threats from individual citizen violence around you. So man, Michael Tubbs, as a mayor, as a Black man, and as somebody who, I mean, those were huge, what are you talking about, 30% reductions in some of those crimes and violence? I mean, this is incredible. How did you achieve that, and what should California learn from you?
Yeah, well first let me say, I think part of it was proximity. Like it was personal to me. I ran for office for city council because my cousin was murdered in Stockton. So this idea of safety and public safety was not theoretical. It was like, how do you make this not happen again? And I'm 34. My father's been incarcerated for the past 33 years. So in terms of understanding the carceral system and sort of the impacts of that, and I just knew particularly as you mentioned, as a Black man, part of my role would be making sure we're responsible and smart and data-driven with how do we actually solve a really real problem. And I think the biggest insight I had was from doing ride-alongs with my police officers and realizing that they were called upon to do so many things that they're not trained to do. I spent 10 hours on my first ride-along, and in the course of 10 hours, we were therapists, we were relationship counselors, we were parents trying to help kids get to school, we were a job program, as someone called us because someone stole $5 worth of earrings from the thrift store. We were mediators, and then we were we were detectives because we came to someone was shot, but we got there after the shooting, right? So we were detectives, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're called upon we were mental health clinicians. Like, I was like, this very rarely you get to do police work. Like, you're doing all these other things, and that's frustrating because A, you don't have the training for it, so you're frustrated. B, the public's frustrated because we're not getting the results we want to see on these other issues, and you can't really focus on what I define as actual police work. So with that insight, I was like, okay, how do we make sure that we don't use police for everything, but we actually have other tools in our toolbox to deal with other problems? Like you don't use a hammer for what a wrench does. You don't use a screwdriver for what a hammer does. Yeah, we use police officers for everything, and that's just not what they're supposed to do or what they're good at. So we invested in we were one of the first cities in the state to do the alternatives to police response for mental health. Because what we found, we had a huge problem with officer-involved shootings. And my brilliant police chief, Eric Jones, we looked at the data and we found like, oh my gosh, 70% of the folks who have been shot, often fatally by our police department, had a mental illness. They were in psychosis. They were schizophrenic. They were bipolar, which doesn't mean they weren't a threat or there wasn't real fear, but it does mean that our officers weren't trained to be mental health professionals. And what they saw was what they were trained to see, a threat that needed to be neutralized. So we overhauled our training of that, but then we also partnered with our hospital systems to provide first responders who are social workers and mental health clinicians who go out before police and try to diffuse situations. And then if they can't, and it's a real violent threat, then officers come in. And we led the state in a decline in officer-involved shootings in 2019. In part because of that work, we looked at the data around shootings and we treated gun violence as a public health issue and said that shootings don't happen everywhere in the city. They happen in very particular parts of the city that oftentimes have no access to transit, no jobs, no opportunity, legacies, the redlining, the list goes on. And we're like, of the city of 320,000 people, it was 84 guys who were most likely to be the victims and perpetrators of violent crime at any time, meaning that it's hard to devise a solution for 300,000 people. But I was like, we could put our heads together and think about these 84 guys. Like, we all have more than 84 friends on Facebook. Like, we can act, that's manageable and bite size. And then what we found upon further research is that these 84 guys weren't mysteries to us. They weren't like surprises. These were folks who had been arrested 8 times on average. So we had been in communication with them, and the tools we had weren't sufficient because they were still shooting. But we knew who they were. They were mostly on probation and parole, meaning they had mandated conversations with someone from government once a month, but were still shooting. They were 50% were homeless and couch surfing, 60% food insecure and hungry, and almost 100% were both shooters, but also had been shot at. That it conflated the narrative that they were perpetrators, but they were also victims too. And just really thinking very clearly around, okay, what are the services and opportunities folks need? And then giving folks that chance and saying, well, hey, look, we know life sucks. We know things aren't fair. We understand that. And here's opportunity. And I want you to take advantage of that. If you take advantage of it, we're resource scarce, but because you're such a priority, you don't have to wait in line. You can be the first one to get your tattoo removed. You're the first one on the list, which pissed some people off. I'm like, it's a priority. Like, we have to do that. If we don't have enough resources, let's be smart. But then secondly, it was like, and the cops and the DA, and we would be in meetings myself, the police chief, the DA, and I would say, the police chief and the DA, they're not going anywhere. Jails aren't going anywhere. And in fact, they have a mandate to be more aggressive because the violence is unacceptable. So if you don't take advantage of these resources, I no longer can help you. I'm saying I need. So it was that messaging and consistency. I think that helped in being very data driven, but also, and I think this goes with all the work overall, it was just being very comfortable with saying the status quo isn't working. And because it doesn't work, as a leader, I have a responsibility to make it better, which might mean challenging convention, which might mean taking some risk, which might mean pushing back on the thinking that got us to this point, because the thinking that created the problem is not going to be the thinking that solved the problem. And in that case, the thinking was lock everyone up. But y'all, we tried that. So maybe that's not the solution. Maybe there's other things we can do. And what we saw is that not everyone changed. Not everyone took advantage, but 40% reduction in back-to-back years to date, the only 2 years this century that Stockton has had less than 40 homicides was 2018 and 2019. That it worked, but it was a lot of work.
So, Steve, can I jump in?
Yes, you may.
So one of the reasons I actually became a big fan of yours in this particular arena is because you always seem to focus, even what you were just saying now, you tended to focus on outcome-based solutions. How do we get the most efficient policy to impact the most amount of people, and how can we be like as effective as possible? And I feel like this actually ties into the YIMBY Democrats of America pretty well. The focus on anti-poverty, the efforts to provide like a future and a vision for America that it focuses on an affordable living space where everybody can have their own economic development to leave poverty basically. Can be found in the most outcome-driven solutions. That's why I was really happy to see that you were advocating for some of these housing supply bills, because, I mean, one of the other things involving, and correct me if I'm wrong, involving poverty, crime, and mental health is a lack of stable housing. Yeah. I've heard so many stories. I have this one particular of this old black veteran woman at the opening of an affordable housing complex. And it was this like, back in 2019, and it was this affair where a bunch of like politicians and government people were like patting themselves on the back and like, yeah, it was something to celebrate.
What we do.
Yeah. And this lady, like totally unscripted, took the mic and was describing about how having a stable place to call home basically made her feel human again. And she also described on how she's had first, second, third, fourth chances, and she's never all she needed was a stable place to call home to be able to get out of that. And that's basically one of the visions I feel like we can provide with more, housing abundance in America, and how I feel like that ties in with a lot of the anti-poverty work you've done.
Well, I remember when my mom bought her first home. She was 26 years old, and it was back then housing was affordable, so she bought it for like $150,000. Wasn't huge. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom in Stockton, and we watched it be built from the ground up. So we'd drive by it every day, and she would talk to the contractor, and just seeing sort of the pride and like the sense of not just somebodyness, but the sense of I'm part of community. I have a stake in this. I have some ownership. And again, home ownership may not be for everyone, but everyone should have the chance to make that decision for themselves, and that decision should be made by supply. Like we should, the baseline we should provide supply A.
True that.
But then also B, like I was reading some research the other day about how for folks our age, between 35 and 44, home ownership has decreased by 10% than the previous generation of our age, and how the average age of a first-time homeowner is so much older today than it was 20 years ago. And we know that in this country, so much of wealth, not just for you, but for your children and your children's children, or for a business you may have, is tied up in home equity. And once you get on, it's an on-ramp. Usually that goes up. But if you can never get on the ramp, you have it's like a game being played, and you can't even get in. You can't even try. And I think that's just fundamentally unfair, and that as Democrats, as whatever, however we want to label ourselves, the job has to be not just giving people hope in the abstract, but hope in like reality. Like, look, we can't guarantee an individual outcome. We can work towards some policy outcomes, and hopefully you will have an opportunity to own a house, or hell, before that, an opportunity to afford rent, an opportunity to stay in California. And I'll be quiet after this, but I think my biggest fear is that if we don't get as serious, and you all are serious, if elected leaders don't get as serious as you all in the next decade, with all the changes and disruptions that are going to happen in this economy, that California won't lead, because the leaders will have to go and move to Texas and move to Florida and move to Nevada and move to all these places we say we're better in. But to your point earlier, it's places where a recent college grad can afford housing, that a recent married person with a kid can buy a house with a little bit of space. And I think oftentimes our policymakers are so divorced from that experience because they own their homes. They've owned their homes for a last time. They remember when a down payment was $20,000. Like their point of reference is a world that no longer exists. And I think it's our job to speak truth to power and push us to like create those realities now for us and for our generation.
We will talk in a moment about some of those big economic shifts that are coming. I'm very interested to learn more about how you evaluate your experiments with guaranteed income, what you've learned from scholarship since, how you think about it as a policy matter, and of course, that's going to have a lot of relationship to what might come from artificial intelligence, which is unpredictable, but there are scenarios in which guaranteed income becomes much more relevant much more quickly. But I do want to, while we're on this topic of housing and your background, some of the stories you've told about your childhood, and the stirring eloquence with which you've talked about how scarcity impoverishes and immiserates people, right? It prevents people, families, entire cultures from building wealth and changing the trajectory of their families. It takes people who have jobs but are precarious and sends them to the street. And once you're on the street, it's very tough to pull yourself back up, right? We know that in scarcity, people who are vulnerable and marginalized are the first to lose out in that auction-like bidding war that takes place for those scarce, few available resources. But how? When you talk to, I'll call it your community, when you talk to other Black men, Black families, and a community that has suffered from urban renewal and displacement and erasure and obliteration and is afraid that cycle is continuing and repeating with corporate development, and that new supply will not be for them, but to the eradication of them. How do you have conversations about gentrification, housing, supply, construction with Black folks?
Yeah, I think it starts with just being real, and that gentrification is real. Like, it has happened. It is happening. It does happen, and it does disproportionately impact Black people. I think it also takes this understanding of history, of how sort of it hasn't been 300 years. It's been, 50 years since the Fair Housing Act? It hasn't been a long time where which Black people and other minorities have actually even been able to participate in a housing market that wasn't, and even in that participation, still have to deal with redlining and still have to deal with being denied loans at 2-3 times the rates of other homeowners with the same credit scores, still having their properties appraised lower when they're ready to sell. So I think it's a conversation that has to be multi-layered and multi-dimensional to really get to the totality of the issue. So I think that's one thing. I think on the gentrification front, part of why gentrification happens, though, is because there is a lack of supply. like the part of the issues we have with gentrification is that there's, so like, even if your home or grandma's home accrues so much value and you sell your South LA home for $1.3 million, you make $700, you make some money off it. That's still not enough for you to buy another house in the community because there's not enough supply. That's still not, you'll make some money, but then you'll have to leave and move. So I think part of it is thinking through a multi-layer solution that supply has to be a part of, so that there's a place for that capital to go in community if folks choose to make money off their house, as they have a right to, but want to stay nearby to where they are. And I think when I was mayor, I would always talk about how, and I could be wrong on this, but it seemed like the assumption of gentrification is that this land is more valuable if you're no longer there. that the land has value detached from you, and as soon as you go, we could bring the value up. And I was always interested in saying, no, like, let's get nice things. Let's bring in coffee shops. Let's bring in let's bring in all those things, and let's bring more people in without displacing people who are already there. Which again goes back to my answer, which is we build more, build denser, build. But there has to be more supply. I think that's the first sort of bulwark against gentrification, and then we have to be creative about solutions, about sort of home buyer down payment assistance, rent, like programs that will help. We have all these conversations about the integrity and the character of neighborhoods, but that seems to only be applied when rich white people don't want folks of color in their community, or don't want lower income people in their community. But we could take some of those same principles and think about how do we, in the midst of change, in the midst of new residents coming in, what are the backstops, what are the policies, what are the things we could create to allow for some of the culture and character of those neighborhoods to stay similar, to allow those residents to be allowed to stay. So it's a supply issue, but it's also a conversation about some level of rent balance, right? So that folks aren't just all of a sudden dealing with hundreds of dollars of increases in rent out of nowhere because Stanford grads like me want to move in to South LA. So long answer say I think it has to be measured and balanced, but taking into account what I heard in an earlier conversation, that we're talking about people and not buildings. Yep. We're talking about community and not rooms, and that's sort of the best communities are those that are diverse. The best communities are those that have a mix of old and new. The best communities aren't those that go through rapid change and rapid facelifts. Like that's not. And I think what draws people to certain communities is the history, is the culture, is the people, is the food, and the prices.
Yeah, no, I mean, at the risk of being reductive and corporate, diversity is an amenity. It is nice to be around culture and history and new things and interesting people. And I think your framing here around like we can have nice things, but also like you can have nice things is really important. That idea that it isn't a choice between preserving in amber while they slightly decay these cultural neighborhoods and freezing them versus sweeping them up for the white people. The perks and parks and dogs of gentrification should be for the black people that live there too. They should have nice things and new amenities. And that culture shouldn't be displaced, but it also shouldn't be frozen. It should be growing and thriving. And they should be bigger, taller, more vibrant, wealthier black neighborhoods.
And I think South LA, when I first moved here, I moved to Hyde Park. And I think South LA, although not perfectly, have done a pretty good job with all the development coming in with the Olympics and the Metro Rail and the airport expansion. But I think it's because the leaders were intentional. Like a decade ago, Marquise Harris Dawson, Holly Mitchell, Karen Bass, like all the leaders of South LA had a conversation about these investments are coming down the pipeline. We can't stop, quote unquote, the market, but what can we do to make sure our folks are okay? So they did mass public education and let people know what was coming and how that might impact value and why it may be a good idea not to sell at least immediately. They created Destination Crenshaw and made it so that you don't just go through Crenshaw, but they made Crenshaw a destination with art installations and history and storytelling so that as folks are going from the new Metro line through Crenshaw, they're not just going through, but they're stopping and being part of the community. They help the small businesses around so they get ready for this influx. There was a strategy around we want this investment, but how do we make sure we mitigate harm from the investment? I think that's what's required. There's not like an answer, but the answer is being strategic, being thoughtful, thinking about all the good that can come with new investment and also how to mitigate harm. So how do you educate people and bring them along for the ride? So I tell people all the time, just look at and South LA is different today than it was 20 years ago, right? But I would say South LA still has a feel of traditional South LA. You still see Latino people, you still see Black people, and you see more white people. And it's like, but it's has had an intention about keeping its character while welcoming investment and then also I'll be quiet after this, but they also have a lot of homegrown entrepreneurs who are part of the decision making. So you have Issa Rae bringing in fine scale dining and restaurants and coffee shops and things of that sort. You have Prophet Walker, a young developer who's developing like multi-use and college housing on the Crenshaw corridor. You have Solar Impact and Martin Muoto, another developer who's developing in South LA and around the Crenshaw corridor, but doing so with community. And you have sort of the council member and his staff like being the squeaky wheel, trying to get as much as they can, being as annoying as possible. But it's been, and they've also have tapped into like other partners like banks and other folks to give people loans to expand their businesses or to buy some of the empty parcels of land. So it's been fascinating to watch how folks have harnessed investment have harnessed nice things coming and said, like, no, we don't have to fear it. But we don't have to be passive. We can control it. We can help shape this destiny. And we might not get everything right. And everything might not stay the same, but we could keep character, bring in investment, and make sure that everyone gets to enjoy the new nice things. So definitely I would say the South LA, Dusty Crenshaw area is a good example of investment without gentrification.
Yeah. Michael, I hear you. And what like immediately comes to mind is the fighting the scarcity mindset. Like that's like you just encapsulate it like very well, especially with that messaging.
You know, speaking of fighting the scarcity mindset, we have a few minutes left. And for those few minutes, Michael, I wonder if you can put on your professor cap for a second, because I want us to know, in the year of our Lord 2025, what should we know? What do we as a species know about guaranteed income? And what do you expect in terms of coming economic shifts? And what should policymakers be thinking about and learn from you in the years to come?
Yeah, well, number one, we know that it works. Like we've overseen 20 RCT trials across the country, not done by me, but by independent researchers at the Center for Guaranteed Income Research at the University of Pennsylvania. They all says the same thing, that guaranteed income doesn't make people stop working. In fact, in many cases, it allows people to pursue work more, to go from part-time to full-time work, to pay for childcare so they can go to work, to deal with the transmission so they can go to work, to take time off their part-time jobs so they can apply for the full-time job. We know that has positive health impacts, that so much of the stress and anxiety we see in our society are real mental health impacts, but oftentimes the causal link is because of economic scarcity. It's because of stress. It's because of not sleeping. It's because of not being able to take care of yourself because you worry about paying for necessities. We know, as it relates to housing, that the average amount of money that people are evicted for isn't the full amount of rent. It's $381. Like folks are able to pay some of it. They're not like, I'm not going to pay rent. They're like, this is what I have to pay. And like guaranteed income is a stabilizer to allow people not to be evicted, because we also know when someone is evicted, it's hard to get them back in housing. We know it has all types of cascading impacts on generations, not on folks and also their kids. And we also know that a guaranteed income is not a panacea for everything. It can't solve for every issue, but it can solve for the issue of lack of cash and for folks just seeing a floor and a foundation. And we did a large-scale experiment in this country during COVID with the child tax credit, where in 1 year, 90% of the kids in this country qualified, and we cut child poverty in half in 1 year. So it's also doable. And the country didn't change. And this is at a time when like people were protesting the Capitol, like protesting elections, like doing insurrections, but not a single person burned their stimulus check or their child tax credit. Not a single person protested that. No Republican was upset. In fact, then President Trump, maybe he stopped the printing press and said, do not print these checks unless my name is on them. I want people to know I did this, right? So we know it's also a winning issue. And with automation and with AI, we don't know the exact impacts, but we know there will be some disruption. We know that new jobs will be created, but we also know some people will lose their jobs. And what's interesting about it is that the research tells us that the types of folks who are going to lose their jobs aren't the people but in addition to call centers, it's going to be white collar workers. It's going to be entry-level accountants, entry-level lawyers, entry-level folks who have professional jobs, who went to good schools, who went to college and got the degree. And we're going to have some sort of floor to allow folks to transition to the new jobs that are created, to allow folks to stabilize and to allow folks to get those early job experience, number one. And then number two, I think in addition to universal basic income, part of the conversation I want to have, particularly as Lieutenant Governor, is what does universal basic capital look like? Given that these language models are valuable because of our data, given that social media is valuable because of our data, how do we own a piece of that so that it compounds and grows? And then we all have a stake in the success, and we all have a stake when things go well. And whether it's a fund similar to like just like in Alaska, they have the permanent fund based off oil because that's their oil.
Right.
In California, our oil is tech, it's innovation, it's data, it's AI, it's the future. And we have to have a conversation about how do we make sure everyone gets a piece so that folks are able to transition, thrive, and benefit from, again, what they're giving value, what they are making valuable with their decisions, with their questions, with their pictures, with their uses. Like, they're all data companies at the end of the day. And that data is ours.
I love that, right? I mean, that idea that our oil is us,
Yeah.
right? It's our words and our emotions and our attention. And when the stock market goes up, when companies boom, when they hire people, create jobs, the oil that is running them, the thing that they are selling is your attention. And we should make a little bit from our attention.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Michael, it has been such an honor to hang out with you today, get to know you a little bit, and hear about your work in lifting people up, right? And that's lifting people up with guaranteed income and brazen, innovative, early experiments in that you saw through and continue to see through. You talk about, I think keeping people safe and making sure communities are places where everyone can thrive with kind of a new deal for both citizens and police in terms of their roles and how they can sort of engage and participate in the culture. And of course, lifting people up now in your work as you pursue the lieutenant governorship and fighting for homes, and maybe we'll lift some people up quite literally up into the sky.
We have.
Look, I'm going to come to you for final remarks and thoughts in a second, but I do want to give Alex and Zenon a chance to just throw out any final parting thoughts.
Go for it.
I mean, honestly, I had one question that I was really curious about.
Get it in there.
Which was about there's been this unholy alliance for a long time between a lot of people that are on the progressive side but have been opposed to change versus like you got your massive McMansion homeowners who are like, yeah, we don't want any change. And that's what's been stopping a lot of development and a lot of progress in trying to create new things because we don't want to see that change. But I think we've been starting to see that coalition start to fracture. Like, I think like the win with Zoran in New York City is a fantastic example of that. We had he's a halal economics where he talked about like reducing the permit prices for getting halal truck permits and like talking about building more supply as a means of making sure we can deliver and government can deliver. I don't know if you can kind of touch on that a little bit in yourself and where you see yourself in that dynamic and how that's kind of heading out.
Yeah, I think I am someone who I'm just not, I don't, orthodoxy isn't my thing, right? I have a clear sense of values. And then those values operate issue by issue. So I think I am obsessed with government working. Right? I'm obsessed with delivering. I'm obsessed with sort of outcomes. And I think because in Stockton I had 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats on my council to do all the work I did, I've just become very astute at just getting things done. So people say I'm progressive, and some progressives say I'm progressive. So I don't know. I live at the end of the day, I live with myself as someone who believes that everyone has inherent dignity and value, equal value, and that government has to work for everyone, and that government has a responsibility to correct the harms that government caused. That's my political philosophy. One-on-one. And I'm also someone who's not afraid to fight. And I'm someone who believes that government doesn't just belong to the people who pay attention, doesn't just belong to the people who benefit from government contracts, doesn't just belong for the industry around government, but actually belongs to the people who are too busy to even know what the hell is going on in Sacramento, and that have a responsibility to always show up and advocate for them. So I don't know if to answer your question.
Yeah.
I love it. The left-right spectrum breakdown and questions of like where on the left are you? To me, it's always so funny because we have this attachment to this, like it is this map that can explain and where a human falls, but it's actually just asking left-right is. It's. I guess we don't have BuzzFeed quizzes anymore. It's basically a stupid online quiz asking where would you have sat in the like first year of the French Revolution. That's what it is. There was one building, and and the more liberal people sat on the left side, and the more right wing, and it didn't even last that long. It's literally a question of like, what table would you have sat at in 1790 or something? It is a stupid way to describe politics.
probably get in trouble for this, but whatever. But
Do it.
I also don't think there's a right. Like, I think anyone who aligns with the Republican Party today is far right. There's nothing conservative about massive government spending or there's nothing good governance about kidnapping people off the street. There's nothing conservative about corrupt. Like that is not right. That's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's left and wrong. But so I think that there is, and I tell people all the time, I think we have to be wedded to solving the problem than to having the solution. Like I think if we have that beginner's mindset, like this is a problem, and being open to solutions, we could get to more solutions because no one has all the answers. No way of thinking has all the answers, as well as we're centering everyone and thinking through just basic norms of human decency. I think that gives us the opportunity to come up with solutions that may be right, but again, those words mean nothing. What matters is the impact. Like, are people helped? Are people housed? Are people clothed? Are people fed? And that should be how we measure one's political orientation.
I mean, thank you for making that point. Because, like, journalists, please remove the word conservative from your vocabulary when talking about the right and the Republican Party. It is gone. If you are trying to repeal the last 100 years of American global leadership and the American welfare state and American economy, if you are trying to disrupt the world order, then without even asking if it's good or bad, it's bad, we can conclude that that's not conservative.
It's radical.
And while we're at it, let's not call people progressives who are scared of the future. If we care about progress, we have to build progress.
Those are going to be my ending comments, actually.
Do it. On to Alex.
I mean, I think the whole crux of why we're here with like the YIMBY Democrats with America is we have to sell a better vision to our party on what we could do with economic development, give people an opportunity to live, the working class. And it's clear that we fell off of that a little bit in the last election. And I think that's just the work you've been focusing on, especially on outcomes. I think this is where we really need to go. And I think this is how it ties into abundance and, building a better America where people can thrive, is focusing on these anti-poverty, fight the scarcity, kind of solutions that I think Michael really encapsulates.
And oh, by the way, that outcome-oriented vision is the origin of progressivism. That is what it means. The original progressives were the YIMBYs, the wonks, the data dorks who thought that if you applied a scientific lens of inquiry and experimentation and reason to the world around us, if you cared about numbers and data, that you could use that to create better solutions. And then, like FDR, you could evaluate those solutions. It's what you talked about too earlier. I was going to bring it up earlier because the New Deal was not handed down like tablets to Moses, nor was it some long-standing master plan of FDR's. He took office in a crisis. He said, we just have to try shit, as much shit as possible, as committed as possible, and we're going to constantly evaluate and experiment, and we're going to run with what works, and we're going to change what doesn't. That was our New Deal. That was FDR.
And I'll be quiet after this, but I tell people, or how I think of it, is that the most progressive thing you could do is hold power accountable. The most progressive thing you can do is demand that government works. Like, that's literally what it means to be progressive, to hold power to account, to say this government we're all giving money to has a responsibility to us, and then making sure it ensures its responsibility. So building housing, all types of housing, including affordable housing, is progressive. And I was talking to a friend the other day, and I also think that this is not about being like anti-union. Like, unions are good things, just like building housing are good things, and that sometimes interests converge and sometimes interests collide, and that there has to be dialogue. Sometimes there'll be some conflict, but that doesn't mean the project's law. That doesn't mean like there's no alignment anywhere. It means that we have to come to grips with the fact that, in California, we have unions, and union wages are good things. And we also have to come to grips with the fact that in California, we need more housing, and a lot more housing. And in fact, it's better for unions when there's more housing because there's more jobs that are created. So I think, to your point, it's just pausing a little bit and really disentangling and let everyone see the whole picture. Like, this is what we're trying to get to. This is our goals. This is what we stand for. And this is how we get there. And I think our job is to paint a vision that's big enough where everyone sees themselves in it, even if the role isn't exactly the same as it's always been, because change is also part of life, part of government. It's a constant, particularly in the times we live in.
Yeah. You know, as Democrats, as progressives, we, I think, believe in ourselves and are committed to the cause of being champions for the working class and for working people in America and California, right? And it doesn't help working people in America or working people in California if one group of workers' wages rise so much that all the other workers can't afford a place to live or stay in that neighborhood or spend so much time commuting they can't be with their families. But when we build, and of course the alliance between the YIMBY movement and the labor movement in California has been so instrumental in so many changes in the state, because it is workers that build those homes. It is workers who live in those homes. When we build those homes, it is workers that can stay in their homes.
Who want to afford the homes they build.
Afford the homes they build, live by where they work so that you are spending those 6 hours with your family and not the highway. Michael, you have a verbal tick, which I'm sure you're aware of, but you've said it at least 3 times here. You've said, "I'll be quiet after this," and I'm sure you learned that somewhere. I'm sure you had to learn that, and I don't know if that was just growing up as a young black man in America. I don't know if that was a family member who told you that. I don't know if it was your campaign team who said, "Man, keep it short for the clip," But yeah, you've said it a few times, I'll be quiet after this, and my wish for you is that you don't.
I appreciate that.
I agree.
I'd like, stay loud, man. And speaking of, one final opportunity, Michael Tubbs, loudly, without being quiet after this, although the whole podcast might be quiet after this. It's all got to end at some point. No finale, no story. So, Michael Tubbs, thanks for being with us today. Man, what thoughts do you want to leave us with, and how do we follow you and your campaign for Lieutenant Governor, and how do we support you?
You can follow me at Michael D. Tubbs on Instagram, on X, and I think I just created a TikTok recently, and it's at Michael D. Tubbs. Really excited about that. Or michaeltubbsforca.com. You can sign up for updates. You can donate. You can volunteer. You can send your policy ideas. And the last comment I'll make is this, that given everything that's happening nationally, California is even more important. And that the alternative to MAGA can't be unaffordability. It can't be an inability to build anything. It can't be homelessness. That as folks are looking for an alternative to Trumpism, California has the opportunity, but we have to lead. And not just in words, but in action. So in this moment, our state has to be very clear-eyed, very resolute, and very determined to begin to solve the issues we face, number one being housing and housing insecurity. And that's going to require all of us to think differently. It's going to require leadership. And that's why I'm running for Lieutenant Governor, is that I am prepared, excited, and willing to help exert the leadership necessary to move California from the state of inertia to a state of progress. And meaning that progress is happening all around California government. From the tech, like everything else around it seems to be moving quickly and pivoting and responding to the times. And Californians deserve a government that's also as nimble, as creative, as innovative, as forward-thinking, as future-embracing as the sectors that power its economy are. And that's the only way we defeat MAGA once and for all. It's not just providing a vision, but a reality where folks are like, well, wow, I want to live in California. They have all this liberal stuff. It works. It's clean. It's safe. I can afford to live there. It's fun. There's things to do. It's diverse. But we have to make that vision a reality, and we can do it. And that's why I'm excited to be running.
The eyes of the world are on us. And I do believe you're 100% right. What we do here and what we do now and soon is going to decide the fate of America, and therefore the fate of world history, I think, for quite a while to come.
Yeah, not hyperbolic at all. Seriously.
Mm-hmm. So let's go do it.
Let's do it.
Michael Tubbs, let's build California, build America, defeat fascism. Michael Tubbs, thank you so much for joining us today on Radio Abundance. For Zen and Alye Crow and Alex Melendrez, I am Steve Boyle. Thank you for joining us on Radio Abundance, live in Los Angeles, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Radio Abundance, a new podcast by YIMBY Democrats for America. Now it's time for you to join the movement. We're building a big tent, and it's going to take all of us. Join us and fight for progressive abundance at YIMBYDemocrats.org.